Busy, everybody. You want before we have to wrap something in my car?
We are live streaming.
Good evening, candidates and ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our virtual provincial election fireside chat event, Sudbury riding, hosted by the Greater Sudbury Chamber of Commerce in partnership with our sponsor, Post Media. I am Neil Milner, Chair of the Board of the Chamber and your moderator tonight. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people of Turtle Island and proudly recognize our local host, the Atikamekw Anishinaabe. We also recognize the contributions of the Wanapitei First Nations and the Métis Nation of Ontario. We hope tonight's panel event will assist you in casting your ballot for a member of Provincial Parliament on June 2nd. Let us begin by introducing the candidates and outlining the rules of procedure for this event. Our candidates in alphabetical order by surname are David Farrell, Liberal Party, David Robinson, Green Party, Jamie West, New Democratic Party. These candidates have been briefed on the rules of procedure for tonight's discussions, but I will outline them briefly for the audience. The following are the rules that will be followed this evening. Each candidate will be invited in alphabetical order to address the audience for 2 minutes with an opening statement. They will be advised when their 2 minutes are up. Following the opening statements, the moderator will pose a series of questions to be answered by each of the candidates. These questions will concern provincial issues of importance to the business community. Though the responses are not timed, we recommend keeping the answers to a maximum of 2 minutes per question. The moderator may engage with a candidate to request clarification on a response. Other candidates may also challenge a response. Candidates questioning and challenging one another must do so in a respectful and courteous manner. Candidates must not monopolize the question period. The moderator may give a time's up warning, and if the candidate does not heed this notice, their microphone may be muted. Following the moderator's questions, a public question period will be held where at-home audience members may pose a question to be addressed by one specific candidate. If your question does not identify whom you would like to respond to your question, we will select a candidate randomly. Any member of the audience wishing to have their question asked must type their question and who they would like to respond to it in the Q&A box in the bottom of the screen. The questions will be reviewed and the moderator will pose them to the appropriate candidate. Questions may be asked in both English and French. Questions in French will be asked by Chamber Director Joanne LeBreton. Bilingual candidates are encouraged to answer French questions in both official languages. For Anglophone candidates responding to a French question, your answers will not be translated into French. Again, we recommend that candidates keep their answers to a maximum of 2 minutes. Following the public question and answer period, each candidate in reverse alphabetical order will have the opportunity for a final 2-minute summation. Now let's begin by calling on the candidates, beginning in alphabetical order by last name for their introductory remarks. Mr. Farrell.
Well, good evening, everyone. Bonjour. Je m'appelle David Farrell. Ani. I'm the Ontario Liberal candidate for Sudbury. Now, I've been a very active member of our community over the past several years. I care deeply about our community, and now I want to take my leadership and empathy for this community to the next level. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, my family. I've been married to my wife, Catherine, for the last 35 years, and she's a very well-known geologist in our community. I have a son, Wilson, who is 18 years old. He's the pride of our lives. He's smart. He's a hockey player. He was drafted by the Sudbury Wolves a couple of years ago. My career, I was a principal educator in our community. I worked as a teacher, vice principal, and principal, and served many of the people in this community over the years. Like many Sudburyans, I have been a community volunteer. I've worked with the food bank. I served as our board leader for the Egerburton Food Drive. I've spent a lot of time with Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation. I've worked in the CBC Run for the Cure, and with many people, we raised over $500,000 during that time. And I'm very proud of my time as being the chair of the board of the hospice over the last 8 years. I also have a small business. My wife and I run a business called Ferrex Geomine. Well, of course, she's the brains of the outfit. I'm just the guy who looks after the books. But in all seriousness, let me tell you why I'm compelled to run. I lost my father-in-law from COVID in May 2020, and I realized at that time we needed to do something very different for long-term care in this province. And also Laurentian University, and I maintain we did not have to go into the CCAA process. And quite frankly, we never had a chance to do a Made in Sudbury solution. So what has this taught me? This has taught me that we don't have effective representation at Queen's Park. We need a change. We can't have 4 more years of the Doug Ford Conservatives. I'm running to be your voice. I'm running for a strong voice here in Sudbury and at Queen's Park. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Dr. Robinson, your opening statement, please.
Well, hello, Sudbury. I want to be your MPP. Why? Because I want to make Sudbury richer. And so I can save the next generation from the climate disaster that's coming. You may know me now for bringing 1,200 jobs or so to Sudbury. You may know me for starting the School of Architecture. You may know me for having initiated the mining supply and services cluster's self-awareness, identifying it and starting some of the organizations, including SAMHSA and the journal, the Sudbury Mining Solutions Journal. Both of those I initiated. You may know me for doing hundreds of columns in Northern Ontario Business about Northern Ontario's economy. Or if you're in the arts community, you may know me for bringing Pat the Dog, a playwriting organization, to Sudbury 10 years ago. It's now been producing plays in this city for 10 years, and it's brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars and given local artists a chance to develop their skills. They're operating right now. I'd suggest you get a ticket. You may want someone with a track record of real change in this community. You may want somebody who is actually teaching economic development strategies to economic development officers across the north. You may want someone who has demonstrated that they can make changes in organizations where they aren't in a position of power by influencing others. And if that's what you want, then you better vote green for 2 reasons. To get that person, and because this is the only party that's serious about the climate change problem that we're facing. This is a disaster coming, and give me a chance and I will do my best to tear apart the imitation strategies of the other parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. West, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Neil. Merci. Hello, bonjour, René. Je m'appelle Jimmy West. Je suis le député provincial de Sudbury. Je m'excuse. Je suis le candidat NPD de Sudbury. I'm happy to say hard. I want to thank the Chamber for organizing the event, and I want to thank everyone who's joining us virtually, as well as my colleagues here. It's very difficult to put your name on a ballot, and so my congratulations to all of you. As I said, my name is Jamie West. I'm the incumbent candidate for the riding of Sudbury from the party, the NDP party. I grew up here in Sudbury and I raised my kids here. I've lived in every section of this riding, including Coppercliff. And I've been very proud to represent the people of Sudbury and Coppercliff for the last 4 years. It's been my pleasure to echo and amplify your voices here in Sudbury and as well as in Queen's Park. This community is absolutely amazing. It is hardworking, it is driven, and filled with dedicated and caring people. I've always known this, but over the last 4 years, serving as the MPP, especially during the pandemic, I've seen some truly amazing, resilient work and some incredible kindness. I know that despite hard work, many in our community are feeling squeezed. The systems that are meant to support them are, frankly, they're broken, and the rising costs are making day-to-day life challenging. People in the north should not be waiting several months to see a doctor. Seniors shouldn't be suffering in long-term care. Families shouldn't struggle month after month to pay the bills or fill up their gas tank or put food on the table. Young couples and families shouldn't be cut out of the housing market. The life we're working hard for seems so out of reach to too many people. And decades of conservative and liberal governments have underinvested and underfunded our public services like healthcare, long-term care, and education. It doesn't have to be this way. Things can be better because when you elect new Democrats, you elect people who work for you, not the wealthy, not the well-connected, but people who work for you. The NDP can deliver the change that we need. Our team is strong and ready to fix the things that are broken. Our top priority is investment in people, in workers, in families, in small business communities. I'm so excited to be running again to represent Sudbury and Coppercliff. We have a plan to fix what's broken. Thank you. Merci, Miigwech.
Thank you, Mr. West. Thank you all for your introductory remarks and keeping them to almost to the 2-minute limit. So that's a great start for the night. So now I'm going to begin the question period and we'll call upon the candidates in random order to respond to this question. What are your party's plans for business confidence and predictability? And first up is Dr. Robinson. Your response, please.
Thank you. I guess the easiest thing to say about business confidence, and you should all think about this, is if you can make the economy boom, really make the economy boom, then the question of confidence goes away. Our retrofit plan, where we are going to retrofit hundreds of thousands of homes so that they don't use a lot of fossil fuels, so that they can use heat exchangers, so that people can live more cheaply in them, is going to create 130,000 jobs within a year and a half. And we think 450 if we do the modeling over the longer period. So businesses in Northern Ontario are not going to have to worry. They're going to have to struggle to find enough workers. They're going to have to struggle to get their supply chains going. That's not the kind of thing you want to worry about right now. That's good news. We've got a good news budget for you. And partly to make that work, let me say one thing really important about this. The bottlenecks are not technology. The bottlenecks are a few rules that get in the way and the fact that we don't have the people to do those jobs right now. So we've got a commitment to training people for the green climate economy for free and giving them jobs for the first year. We are going to suck young people who are unemployed or underemployed into that sector in order to transform the economy. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. West, your response, please.
Thank you, Neil. I think the importance of restoring business confidence or growing business confidence. First, I want to thank the Chamber for all the work you've done over the last 2 years of the pandemic. Quite frankly, the Conservative government dropped the ball when it came to addressing and helping small businesses. A lot of areas, especially a place like Sudbury, you tend to think that, places like Valley or Glencore or the hospital are your large employers, but the reality is across Ontario, the largest employers are small businesses. And small businesses that quite frankly are hanging on by their fingernails, looking for a way to survive. And we know that through the rounds of small business support grants, they didn't get to everybody. And there wasn't a way to appeal those or to find out why you weren't getting them. And so what we're going to be doing immediately following the election in 2 rounds of funding is provide the funding to small businesses so they can keep their doors open and survive. This will be predictable. It'll come on time. You won't be waiting and wondering what's happening. And that'll help stabilize the market and provide relief. I think as well, we've been talking now for many, many years. We know the Liberals forgot about Highway 69. They were able to tender the last 68 kilometers. But having those last 68 kilometers not only makes the place, our city, safer, the traveling, but it allows businesses to depend on just-in-time deliveries, which are also important. I think as well, we need to recognize the need for trained workers. Our trades force is dropping dramatically. And for some reason, we don't attract people to trades, and we need to change that around. We need to focus on drawing people to the trades, making an exciting place to work, not just for the men and women who are carrying tool bags, but for people who are in project management and leadership and commerce. Similarly, PSWs need a fair pay. We need to get rid of Bill 124 so our healthcare workers are paid well, because we know that workers drive the economy with the extra money in their pocket. I've said for many years, probably a decade now, because the phrase is getting old, the amount of money in your pocket in the day after you pay for your rent and heat and hydro is what determines if you want an iPhone or a flip phone. And so that's how we're going to drive this economy and ensure that people have more affordability in life and can pay for the things that keep our businesses moving. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. West. And Mr. Farrell, your response, please.
Yes, so we know that the last 2 years has been extremely difficult for business in Ontario and across the country, as a matter of fact. We've been extremely lucky to live in Northern Ontario because we have a first-rate mining and mining service sector. And the way that provides to our economy in Ontario is fantastic. You know, the mining industry produces about $55 billion into our economy each and every year. And quite frankly, that makes Sudbury a special place. We need more Sudburys in Ontario. We need more Sudburys in Canada. We need more Sudburys worldwide. Now, the pandemic was difficult on business, as we know. I think the lockdowns and the constant lockdowns that we heard were very difficult. It was a very difficult time for small businesses. So an Ontario Liberal Party under the leadership of Stephen Del Duca is going to have some immediate steps to help business in Ontario. First and foremost, we know that small businesses are the backbone to our economy. Those mom and pop shops that we have are the people that contribute to our community. They pay for the soccer, they give donations to the soccer team, they give to the food banks. So under Del Duca government, we will be instituting a 2-year corporate tax freeze. We're going to backstop literally thousands and thousands of loans for small business so they can help invest in themselves. Also, we're going to cap credit card fees so that we have a little bit more money into the pocket of businesses so they can do the jobs that they need to. We're going to invest in cutting red tape, a 311 style service, as a matter of fact, so we can help businesses navigate through those difficult things that they're facing. Any growth that we have in the mining sector will help the business community of Sudbury. And one other thing I'd really like to announce, people have to, or just to reiterate on, people need to realize in the last 4 years, the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund was cut by nearly $72 million by the Ford Conservatives. That's $72 million out of our economy. So under a Liberal government, we're not only going to restore that $100 million, we're going to up it to $150 million a year. And that's going to help each and every one of the businesses in our community moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrell. So we have a period of open debate, and I did hear a lot of the group of you speak to some of the commonalities and that speak to the concerns of the business community. Of course, the lack of labor, and everyone spoke to directing labor into skilled trades. But a lot of our members have issues finding unskilled trades, and how do we fill that gap once it's created? And the other thing too is there's lots of discussion about funding. Our businesses are also concerned about the debt load that our government's taking on coming out of the pandemic, and questions as to whether that influx of free cash to people actually starting to drive inflation now. So maybe we'll open up to debate if anyone would like to kick it off.
Sure, I'd like to.
Sure.
A lot of people do worry about the debt. They forget the fact that as a result of the inflation that's being kicked off largely by both American spending to protect banks and our spending around the COVID crisis, we have some inflation. We have significant inflation. And then you add this shock to the oil crisis that's happening. And we're getting a lot of inflation. Now, the thing that does to debt is it makes it disappear in the future. So realistically, you can talk about debt right now, but there's not going to be a lot of it. It's not going to be a problem in the future. And it's especially not going to be a problem in the future in Ontario if we elect a Green government that does what I say, because we're going to have so many jobs and not so much tax revenue that we're going to have surpluses. Now, I'm an economist. I've taught this stuff for 40 years. I'll be happy if David or anybody wants to argue with me about that. The debt worry is not what we need to talk about. The climate crisis is what we have to talk about.
Thank you.
I wouldn't mind just taking a crack at the whole skilled labor and labor shortage. You know, it's an issue for us in Northern Ontario, but right across the province. You know, we have some really good institutions here that can help us with this. We have Cambridge College, College Boreal. You know, I think about the Carpenters Union out in the Zilda. We have the ability to train skilled workers in this community. I think we need to deal with our issues surrounding the labor shortage in a couple of ways. First of all, we need to increase immigration in this country, bar none. The only way for us to get to where we need to be is to have a strong base to draw upon. Also, I think we need to talk about migration of workers into Sudbury. Jamie points out about finishing Highway 69 North. Absolutely, that gets the migrant workers to come back here and come to Sudbury and help provide these things. We need to make sure that the programs are in place for apprenticeships for both trades and unskilled laborers, and that'll help us move our economy forward. So I think that's a really important key message that we should bring out of this meeting tonight.
And, you know, I think you bring a variety of points. We talked about skilled labor and unskilled labor you'd mentioned. I think as well, it's important to mention that dans les communautés francophones, il y a une, je ne sais pas le mot pour shortage des travailleurs qui parlent en français. Et ils cherchent pour les travailleurs dans quelques travail qui parlent français pour les citoyens. Et ça, c'est important aussi. I think as well, if you're looking at labor in any form, it doesn't matter skilled or unskilled, we need to look at the fact that people aren't making enough to pay their bills. That is what's driving us. That's the issue we're having. When you have people who are living so precariously that they're one paycheck from being evicted. And so that could be people who are not working in OW who are making about $700 a month when rent, if you're lucky, is $900 a month, or on ODSP where it's about $1,250, or on minimum wage. If you can't afford to pay your bills and you can't afford to put food on the table, you can't afford to pay for hydro, you're very precarious, you're looking at losing your housing. And then that creates a situation where you're not able to invest and spend in the business as well. And so we need to address this. And so we have a plan as the Democrats to raise the minimum wage, but not the way that happened in the past. In the past, Mike Harris froze it for his entire term during Mike Harris and Ernie Eves. And when he froze minimum wage, it creates an elastic that business cannot respond to. So we want to be responsible about this. It'll be predictable. It'll be about $1 a year. And for small businesses that are frightened with this because we're coming out of a pandemic, there's going to be support. So if you think back to when GST came in, there was rebates and help for people with GST. It's a similar program like that to help you be successful, because for too long, the large corporations that could pay, the Walmarts of the world, who could pay, would hide behind the small business and say it's unaffordable. We can't do it. It's not fair. The reality is that small businesses care about their employers. They know them all by name, but they're always hamstringed because they have to compete with larger corporations, worldwide corporations. And so we need to put money in people's pockets so they can pay the bills. And when you're paying your bills, that's when you go to restaurants, and that's when you buy services, and that's when you expand and you do additions to your house and you get a bigger TV. All of those things are invested back into the economy, and that's how we drive it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your
Can I add
responses.
something to that?
Well, we'll move on to the next question.
I gave you a little extra time last time. Being the only one who's actually succinct, so perhaps. I'll get a
You
little
have
extra
22
time.
seconds.
Okay, we're talking about labor shortages as if they were a provincial problem for Sudbury. They're not.
They're not.
What they are is a national problem and a North American problem. And the fact is, if we want to talk about doing something here in Sudbury, we have to make the city more attractive to workers. It's a talent economy we're competing in, and we're not doing a very good job of it. That is not the provincial problem. They don't care about Sudbury in that sense. It's up to things like the chamber, the schools, the universities, our council to work on that.
Okay.
So much of this talk about what we're going to do about it is just off track. Let's locally focus on what we can do locally, and let's stick to the issues that are provincial issues when we talk about around this table as candidates.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. All right, moving on to the second question. What are your party's plans for economic growth and recovery? How will you support those in the hardest hit industries? And in random order, Mr. Farrow, your response, please.
Yeah, so I've knocked, like I've said earlier, I've knocked on thousands of doors and people are really concerned about economy and the recovery post-pandemic. So our plans, once again, I've said this many times, Ontario needs more Sudburys. The fact that we have such a strong, vibrant mining industry, it's extremely beneficial to our community. We need to continue to invest in the core industries of mining. We need to continue to develop our core mineral strategy, our critical mineral strategies. Quite frankly, the road to economic and environmental sustainability runs right through the mining industry. We have a safe mining practice, we have a clean mining practice, and we do it better than anybody else in the world. We need to continue to invest in those apprenticeships and those skilled trades because of the dwindling workforce. Once again, encouraging migration and immigration to Sudbury. What are we going to do as a party? I think I've made a couple of comments about that beforehand. We are going to eliminate corporate taxes for a couple of years. We're going to backstop those thousands of Ontario businesses that need loans to help them get moving forward, cap the credit card fees, and once again, really invest in supporting the mining industry, not only in Sudbury, but in Northern Ontario.
Thank you, Mr. Farrow. Mr. West, your response, please.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. This has been very heartbreaking over the last 2 years. The businesses have been really struggling, and we're focusing right now on the hardest hit. And these, by wide majority, are mom and pop businesses. My mom had a small business. I lived on Cabot Street in Sudbury housing, and my mom opened a small business cleaning houses. And that literally pulled my family out of poverty. And so I know how important small businesses are. I know how they resonate, and I know that your heart and your soul and sweat and tears go into that. And I'm reminded very often during one of the earliest lockdowns, second or third, I can't remember. It's unfortunate because in Ontario, we had more lockdowns than any other province, and we had longer lockdowns than any other province because of a lack of foresight from the Conservative government. But the hairdressers would speak to me and say, what do I need to open? What do I need to do? Do I need to wear a hazmat? Do I need to wash the place in bleach? Can I have one person at a time? Can I not use a blow dryer? What do I need to do? And the Conservative government failed to respond. The response from the Conservative government basically was, you're looking at a sea of small businesses that are drowning. And they were on the shore with a towel saying, if you make it here, here's a towel for you. So two things we need to do, because we're still in COVID. We're very hopeful there's light at the end of the tunnel, but people aren't coming out. We're doing a virtual debate, for example. And so we have to have support, ongoing support for these businesses, especially tourism, that we have narrow windows in the summer and in the winter for ice fishing and for visiting outdoors. But we have to ensure the support is there. We have to ensure that loans are there and forgivable loans in low interest loans. But we have to look at providing support, immediate support to keep the doors open and the lights on so that they can recover. All of this that happened to these businesses had nothing to do with poor decision-making. It was a pandemic that sidelined them. And we have to respond to them. When we ask people to shut down for the safety of the citizens, then as citizens, we need to help them. And as representatives of citizens, we have to be there to help them so that they survive, not just for the business, but for their employees to be able to continue to work and drive that economy. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, your response, please.
Well, I'm going to be different from either of my colleagues here. I'm going to talk about what the Sudbury economy needs. And contrary to what my friend David says, it's not the mining industry we have to support, because we're not going to do a lot more mining in Sudbury, and there's not going to be a lot more mining jobs in Sudbury. We have to focus on building up our mining supply and services sector and the research that we do. If we want to promote the local economy, then we darn well better get Laurentian back on track with a lot of money for research in mining related things and a new section working on the mining supply engineering side. We've got to start systematically supporting our mining supply firms, whether they're engineering firms or geology firms or technology firms, whether they produce communication equipment or whether they're just consultants. I'm sorry, guys, I said something terrible there. This is a talent-based economy, and we have to, as a community, be lobbying really hard and hammering Queen's Park to put money into those sectors, and they haven't done it. They won't do it unless we actually focus, and we got to stop saying mining sector. That's up north. That's where the mines are going to be. The mining supply sector, the mining research sector is what we have to promote. And if we don't do that, all of those jobs go somewhere else. We haven't been doing a good job. Jamie hasn't been doing a good job. And my friend David here hasn't had a chance to try. I've been doing it for 10 years, 20 years almost now, promoting that sector.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. There was one thing in there that is one of the things that has come up throughout the pandemic is of those hardest hit industries. And Jamie, you brought up the hairdressers, and it's a good example. A lot of what they did was they cut hair in their basement, right? And they entered a bit of a shadow economy.
Absolutely.
So as part of your response, I'd like to hear what your party would do to foster bringing those members of our economy that were driven into darkness back into the light and to become once again contributing members to our economy.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a little bit on what David said about the mining industry. I think he's off base. I agree with some of what he's saying with research. I think that the research is going into the tailings pond and the resources that we'll find in tailings and will be shared around the world once it's successful is very important. But pretending that mining is no longer important, pretending mining is not going to affect their economy is no longer, it makes no sense. This is what I heard from you, and I apologize if I got it wrong.
Yeah, you did.
But the reality is that mining is important. For every mining job we have, there are 7 spin-off jobs. It's not the main driver of economy, but it's very, very important. And we need to establish that. And if you're going to a green economy, you need mining as well to be part of it. In terms of helping small businesses, what you need is a partnership with your government. You need a government that works with them to speak with them about what's happening. We failed to see this when they got rid of the colleges of trades, right? None of the trades organizations were involved. Nobody knows what's happening going forward. We know there's a trade deficit. When you look at small businesses or hairdressers, what you need on this is predictability. You need to work in partnership. And if we're in a situation where we're facing lockdowns or shutdowns, you need to have predictability about what's happening. So that small businesses, for example, in last Christmas, were ordering huge supplies of food because the government said there's going to be no shutdown. And then January 3rd shut the economy down and cost a huge amount of backlog. I'm trying to be careful of my time for my colleagues as well. I think it's really important that you provide the money that's there. Having a shutdown in January and saying that a check is in the mail and you might get it in February and March at the latest, if you even get one, is not going to help businesses. What businesses need is predictability over the long term in order to make ends meet, in order to survive, especially when it's precarious like this. And I'll hand over to my colleagues so I don't monopolize time.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the shutdowns because I think that that was absolutely hurtful to the Ontario economy. The fact that we would have a shutdown and then we'd be open and have a shutdown and be open. You know, I come from the educational sector, and it would have been a game changer early on in the pandemic if teachers had rapid tests in the schools. And the fact that they didn't have rapid tests in the school, it really did eat away at their days. They were making decisions on whether a child should be home or not. And quite frankly, you know, we couldn't get a rapid test when it came to the second Christmas, you know, after the pandemic. I think they were all passed out in liquor stores or beer stores in Ontario. And if you really wanted to get one, you couldn't even buy one because the government said, no, you can't do this. Anyways, just having said that, if we had to manage the pandemic as a government, if Doug Ford had to manage the pandemic better as a government, we wouldn't have to have these consistent lockdowns. It was driven politically. They didn't follow the science, and hence that's where we're at today.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, did you have something to add?
I'm a little unhappy that we're talking about Mr. Ford's mistakes 2 years ago. Yes, he screwed up. But in fact, we're coming out of it. The economy, Canadian economy has a very low unemployment rate. Most of these problems that Jamie's talking about are going away. The solution to the hairdresser, if I can answer your question, is you raise the minimum wage, and that hairdresser will work in a proper shop instead of in their basement.
A lot of
Make minimum wage.
a lot of them are self-employed, and those.
So raise the minimum wage. Let's have proper labor laws. You're not going to squirm around this one. But let's look at the future. Where are we going? We want this city to be wealthy and one of the most attractive places in the country. And the way we do that is we get to work on making it prettier, making it nicer, making it more attractive to professionals. And that's our job here. And we get to work on forcing the provincial government to put money into Laurentian, into those programs we need to support our specialization globally, and to put money, where am I going now? And to actually recognize the absolute importance of those firms. And there are about 30 different types of firms. When I say mining supply sector, I'm talking about most of the firms that bring money into the city, except for one great big one that's gradually shedding labor. Jamie has the nerve to lecture me on the importance of mining. Yeah, the steel workers get a lot of money from Vale, but the truth of the matter is it's the firms around Vale that are generating wealth here, and that's what we have to focus on. So David won't say mining anymore. He's going to promise me that after this. And Jamie can stop lecturing me on the importance of mining because I know it. God, I taught everybody that for 20 years.
I apologize if I hurt your feelings. I was saying.
You didn't hurt my feelings. You enraged me that you didn't understand the economy.
It's not, what I heard from you was that mining was the
Yes,
future and
right.
mining is the future. There is a place for mining in the future. That's all I was saying.
There
I was
is a place
clarifying.
for mining.
I'm
It
agreeing
is
with you.
not the future. That shows you don't understand the issue, and that's why you're not suitable to represent the city anymore.
But David, I understand that the mining service sector is the key to the economy of the future. We
Thank
all
you.
wrap that into the fact that mining is important in this. We see so many innovative things happening in this community now, and we do have to make sure that they are at the top of our list as we move forward into the new economy. I totally agree.
Okay,
Thank you.
so thank you. We're going to move on to the next question.
One more on the team.
Move on to the next question. The Ontario Economic Report 2022 by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce found that over 60% of businesses are experiencing labor shortages and expect to continue to face them over the next year. How do you plan to address these longstanding shortages that have been worsened by the pandemic? What are your plans to support the workforce of the future? Mr. West, your response, please.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So part of the reason we're seeing labor shortages has to do with the pandemic, but we're getting the tail of that. But one of the reasons that we're seeing these labor shortages is really that people cannot afford to make ends meet. And so we know more and more that there are students at Laurentian, graduates, who are working 2 or 3 or 4 precarious jobs. We know there are more and more people who are raising children, making minimum wage, and not able to make ends meet. And I don't know how you make ends meet when you're a single. I don't know how you would do it as a single independent. And so we need to attract people with decent wages. We need to raise the minimum wage in a responsible way, in a way that won't create shell shock for business, in a way that will support small businesses that frankly can't afford to make the adjustment as quickly, but in a way that allows the large corporations who could afford to raise minimum wage, which just means their shareholders make slightly less. We need to help them along that way. As well, we need to recognize the qualifications and skills of immigrants that are coming into our community. And I know immigration is a federal issue, but recognizing their skills is a provincial issue. We need to recognize that those people who are coming here with skilled trades and very often are working jobs that are not in the skill that they're for. You know, and it seems cliche that your taxi driver is a doctor, but the reality is we have situations like that. My friend's wife came from Venezuela as a lawyer, and she was in this country for 15 years before she could practice law. There has to be a quicker way to do this because those jobs are required as well. When we look at future technologies and green technologies, there are expertise from around the world, and we need to get them here in order to help train us and help provide the faster service, but not on temporary visas, on ways that are going to attract them and keep them in our community as well. And Sudbury is a great place to do that because it's only in Sudbury where you can have a major center, city center, and just like less than a kilometer away, nature trails to walk and lakes to swim in and all those things that would draw people. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, your response, please.
Okay, well, again, I won't be very general and talk again about social welfare issues, although they're important if we're talking about developing the economy and dealing with the labor shortages. There is one great opportunity that we're passing up. We have a university that has been attracting international students. We can attract students into engineering, especially in all the technical trades, because they have no barriers getting into most of these jobs. Those are the ones we need. Those are the programs we have to support. Those are the ones that the chamber has to start leaning on the university. I'm sorry to bully you here, but you've got to start leaning on the university to promote those programs, and you've got to start leaning on the government. That's the way we get those programs back and develop, not waiting for carpetbagging administrators to come in and fix our problems, not waiting for the banks to treat the university like a piggy bank, not waiting for somebody to sell off the university lands. We've got to be far more active as a community. And one of the key targets for dealing with our specific labor shortages is getting the training programs here for the international students that our mining supply and service companies need. I appreciate that you're taking notes, David.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. Ferry, your response, please.
So great points made by both of my counterparts. Quite frankly, I think about how do we deal with training shortages and labor shortages in the past? We did by immigration into this country. We need to bring more people into this country to help with the shortages that we have. Two ways, it's either by immigration or migration into our community. I agree wholeheartedly with David, as a matter of fact, on this, is we need to make sure that the people in this community know and use the centers of excellence that we developed within our university and college program. The fact that we need to be looking at this on a day-to-day basis. We need to pay people a living wage. This is extremely important. And at minimum wage, we talk about lots, but quite frankly, we need a living wage because people are just not making ends meet. We have great paying jobs here in the mining service sector, and we should be able to attract people to our community a lot easier than we are. And that's where I think the role of the government should be. The government has to make it easier for people to make the transition from either somewhere else in the province or somewhere else in the country or somewhere else in the world to come here and help support us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Just one of the things I don't think any of you touched on was, there was a lot of focus on immigration, and that's certainly been a focus of the chamber. But one of the things that we've also identified as a potential resource for workers that are right here in our own community are the underrepresented populations that experience barriers to entry into the mining economy through no mistake of their own. Or so when we discuss each other's questions, could you please comment on how you think we can reduce some of those barriers and start to ensure that all of our community gets to participate in the mining economy?
I'd like to crack at that right off. We know that the true path to truth and reconciliation with our First Nations community is through economic recovery and economic development. And quite frankly, the mining and mining service sector have been world-class leaders in putting First Nation communities to work. And I think you've hit the nail right on the head when you talk about that's where we start to move our underserviced or underrepresented employees into it. And the mining industry has done a fantastic job with First Nation recruitment, retainment, and getting them involved in the corporate structure of the mining and the mining service companies. And I think we need to continue not only that with the mining industry, but all other businesses in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Farrow.
David's right about that, about the terrific role that mining has played around the province and even here. What's happening right now, though, is that because Aboriginal communities are getting a bigger share of the mining revenues, and they're getting to buy into them, and they're creating jobs in their own communities now, the flow of young Aboriginal who want to work in the mining supply sector is not going to be very big. We can't rely on it. No, I'm just an economist telling you what I think is going to happen. So that's not going to work. It's a good thing, and we will support it for sure, but it's not going to give us a lot of workers. What we can do, and here's where David, if he were still in his old job, could do some good for us. We actually have to find a way to make our own students want to stay in this city. And what happens is our best students leave because they don't know anything about the jobs or the economy of this community. And that's I mean, to be quite honest about that, the reason is we have a colonial education system. It's run from the south. It's not run for the north. It's not run for us. Now, I'll be happy to work with David if I'm elected to help solve this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. West.
Yeah, I'll echo what my colleagues said about mining in Indigenous communities. I think that the Premier did a huge disservice to the mining industry when he talked about running a bulldozer up to the Ring of Fire.
Yes.
That is not how mining does business, hasn't been for at least 20 years that I've been in the industry.
It's embarrassing.
And it was embarrassment, absolutely. I think as well, when you're talking about attracting workers, when you're talking about getting people here, and I'm going to keep going back to affordability because every day I hear at the door, the high cost of gas and the high cost of housing, and that I will never be able to afford a house. That I've never heard that in my life. I grew up in Sudbury housing and I thought one day I would own a house. I cannot believe that people today with full-time jobs and careers don't think they'll be able to afford a house because it is so expensive. And we need to cool off the housing market. We need to get rid of foreign speculators. We need to get rid of people who are buying up the market, who are doing rent evictions, who are changing a couple of windows and jacking up the price or doubling the price of rent. We need to have people with decent money in their pockets so they can afford the rent. And that helps not just the renters, but that helps the landlords because in Toronto, while you have these large corporations that own multiple buildings, the majority of our landlords are mom and pops, right? That's part of the industry. It's somebody, very often it's a retirement plan where they have a decent job and they're trying to pay off this mortgage so they can use that as a retirement plan. And so we need a system that helps the renters, that helps the tenants, that cools off the housing market. So we're not paying the same amount of rent as they are in Southern Ontario. And so that people can afford to have a decent life. I don't think anybody who's played within the rules, who's gone to school, who's worked hard to get in their career expects to be millionaires. But each and every one of us expect to have that Canadian dream where you can raise your kids, where you can have a house or you can afford an apartment, and you're not worried every single day when you go to the grocery store and you purchase things, what item will you have to put back? Will it be toilet paper? Will it be produce? What thing can you not afford this time? And that is unconscionable. And those are the things that we need to tackle.
If I could just pick up for a second with Jamie too, because, Jamie, when I'm out knocking on doors, I see the same thing, hear the same thing that you're hearing too. But I was surprised to see how many empty houses there are in the market in Sudbury here. And my feeling is exactly what you say. The real estate speculators are hanging on to them. And we need to do something about that. On the Ontario Liberal plan, we're looking at actually starting 1.5 million houses over the next 5-10 years. It's really important that we make sure that we're taxing these people for speculation. So we need to really look at that and make sure that we are not having that happen in our economy. So I believe that the supply chain is there, but there are barriers that we have to remove so that we can get those first-time housing, the people that are first time in the market to actually have the opportunity to buy that, right? Also like to pick up on the senior aspect of it too. When we're knocking on doors, I am appalled by the number of seniors that are telling me that we are either making a decision to pay for our rent or pay for our heat or pay for food. And that is just not something we can ever accept in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Okay.
On the housing issue, if I may.
Okay. Go ahead.
The housing problem's not going to go away. Anybody who wants to, for instance, help first-time buyers is going to make it worse. Changing the interest rate won't help. The fact is that we're moving into a situation where the primary feature of housing markets is rising prices because it's a way to get a capital gain.
Speculation.
And that means that every homeowner is contributing to the rise in prices by waiting for that offer for a bigger price. Now, the only way you deal with that is you tax all or almost all of the capital gains in housing. Now, that is the toughest thing to do. The Liberals aren't promising to do it. Even the NDP is afraid to say it. We're afraid to say it. I want to be honest about this. But there is no solution to the housing problem unless you do that and you do one other thing. You start investing heavily in cooperatives because cooperatives do not put housing back on the market. And if it goes back on the market and there's capital gains, housing prices go up everywhere. We stopped subsidizing and supporting cooperatives back about 1990, Liberal government. and the provincial government. It had taken 35 years to get to the point where we're one of the best housed countries in the world. It's taken another 35 years, 30 years to get to the point where we're in a disaster because of that decision. We have to go back to putting massive money into housing co-ops, because that's the only way people are really going to be able to get into ownership in the future.
Okay, thank you. I think now we'll move on to some questions from our audience members. So again, if you have a question for a candidate, please put it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and address it to the candidate of your choice. So the first question that I see is for Jamie, and it's from the Workers Center. How will candidates work to ensure legislation is improving the lives and working conditions of workers, especially those in low wage and precarious employment? What action will help to alleviate poverty and empower workers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to thank the Sudbury Workers Action Center for that. I've been talking all night about affordability and the high cost of living. And I've been upfront about raising minimum wage in an affordable, responsible way. And that helps people out of poverty, but it also helps drive the economy because people, especially the lowest paid people, spend all of their money where they live. But as well, you have to look at what's happened over time. When I graduated from Laurentian University, that was the beginning of the gig economy. Nobody knew it at the time, but I just remember getting contracts and not being able to get a job, just bouncing from contract to contract to contract. And so we have to crush this gig economy where workers who are workers are misclassified as contractors. There's a place for an individual contractor, but having people do the exact same work and make less money, or having people precariously employed, or not accessing the same Employment Standards Acts, we are committed as New Democrats to eliminating this. And Doug Ford pretended he was doing this because he loves to pretend he cares about workers. He pretended he was going to do this when he came forward with this bill about gig economy workers. All that does is guarantee $15 an hour while they're doing a delivery, while they're doing that specific task, which actually makes them earn less money than they would have otherwise. But we need to look at workers, the most precarious workers. We need to get away from the idea that minimum wage workers are teenage kids or high school kids, making money to go on a date or something. These are families. And we know this when we go out shopping. We see elderly people who can't afford to retire and have to take a second job. We see families with children taking these jobs, and we have to put money in their pocket. And we have to provide training so that people can escalate as well. But that really is the most important thing is we have an Employment Standards Act that applies to all workers, not just some workers, and we enforce it. And as well, we provide enough money for people to have in their pocket at the end of the day so they can shop in our businesses and we can drive that economic engine.
Thank you, Mr. West. The next question is
There is
for,
something else that we've missed, if I may just add one comment.
were we debating on these just for point of order?
I mean,
It's up to you.
it's up to you, of course. It's just
Is this around, what
it's
was?
exactly that question. Our policy is a universal living wage that pushes up wages across the economy. On top of that, we're going to double the payments for injured workers and so on. We've actually want to produce a solid living wage at the very bottom of the labor market. And that's going to push up wages, and that's going to produce more employment. Actually, higher wages produces more employment.
Thank you. So the next question is for Mr. Farrell. If you could highlight it for me, that would help. Oh, okay.
That's really hard to see.
The Ring of Fire is a transformative project, not only for Ontario, but also for Canada. And it is proceeding at a very slow pace. What will your party do to expedite the development process so that Ontarians can reap its economic benefits?
Right. So once again, a very, very important topic, a very important project that we need to move forward to support our mining service sector here in Sudbury. Once again, as I said, the mining economy brings about $55 billion into the economy each year. Back in 2018, the Liberals promised to put up $1 billion in starting the road to the Ring of Fire. Of course, last week I heard that Doug Ford re-announced that again. So Ford is recycling that same old campaign promise from the last election.
Only green platform he has.
Yeah, and he couldn't get it done then, and he's probably not going to get it done now. you know, the Liberal government previously had a lot of memorandums of understandings with the First Nation people in northwestern Ontario. I think they had about 14 of the 16 land claims negotiated. Doug Ford scrapped those all, and we will restart those immediately. And, you know, and a good push to the Ring of Fire is important for exploration for those critical minerals that we need for in moving forward environmental sustainability. And of course, the Ring of Fire will only benefit the mining service industry in our community. And so that's what I think we will do as we move forward in the Ontario Liberal government.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Farrell, for your answer. The next question is for Dr. Robinson.
I can actually read it.
Okay, well, I'll read it for the audience. You claim that mining isn't for the future of Sudbury, yet the Ring of Fire presents a massive opportunity for Ontario's and Sudbury's economy. With Doug Ford ready to drive the bulldozers to build a road to the Ring of Fire, what's the Green Party's approach to developing the Ring of Fire other than standing in its way?
There are three questions there, and I love it. One is Jamie's mistake. I didn't say mining is going to be important. I said it's not the future of Sudbury's prosperity. Mining is going to, in Sudbury, isn't going to add a lot of jobs. Furthermore, mining in the Ring of Fire is not going to directly add jobs here. We have to compete to supply that. So I've emphasized that repeatedly. We as a community have to compete. And you know what? The province doesn't really care if it's us or Southern companies. So we have to compete. That's going to take leadership, and I would provide that leadership. I have worked with companies. I brought them together. I brought them together with MLAs in the past. I brought them together with the press and the university, and we've made progress. Yes, it's faded since I stopped working on it, I have to say, but as MLA, I'd go a lot farther. Now, the question about transportation, there's a big one. There's a really big one. The best people we have point to the problem that if you try and run a gravel road across that swampland, it's going to cost you a couple $2 billion, and it's going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain. And those trucks are going to do a lot of damage, and they're going to release enormous amounts of carbon dioxide. This is a 19th century solution that Ford's pushing. Just up the street here, we've got a research institute that suggested we could start building get those mines right now. All we have to do is build a hover barge that'll carry all the equipment in. Better for the Indian communities in the area because they can control it. They could build it. They could run that hover barge. Far cheaper, $50 million at most, a tiny fraction of the cost that you could start in 2 years with the building instead of 8 years, like they're saying. We also have other more advanced technologies. And finally, I wish people would stop saying Ring of Fire. In 2006, I did the calculations. There's likely to be 200 mines in that area. 200. This is not just one little project. We really ought to be setting up a district there controlled by the people who live there now, who are making decisions about the way it's going to be developed. Now, Northerners don't get to say much about their development, the way we run things. This is a colony, but we can fight right now to give the people in the area the chance to manage its development, and including the transportation system instead of this bulldozer and 19th century road plan.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Okay, the next question is for Mr. Farrell. Under the current government, the completion of the 4-laning of Highway 69 isn't expected to be completed for more than another decade at the earliest. What will your party do to work with the First Nations communities to expedite the 4-laning of this highway?
Yeah, so that's a very important question to community in Sudbury. You know, Sudbury's have been waiting far too long for the completion of Highway 69. You know, Doug Ford is currently building what I call the redundant highways. He wants to build the 413 highway across some of the most sensitive environmental land in Southern Ontario when we haven't finished completing the projects that have already been started. Now, for me, it's all about safety. We can't lose another life on Highway 69. It's about, you know, growing the economy. Jamie spoke earlier about just-in-time transport, getting goods and services here in a fast, safe, efficient manner. And it's also about growth. It's easy for us to bring migration into our community. We have a safe traveled highway, which is Highway 69. Now, it's my understanding that the permitting process for Highway 69 is all but complete. We've signed the First Nations agreements. The environmental assessments have all been done. The other thing that's really interesting, and many people don't know this, is that the federal government has already put $160 million into the completion of Highway 69. And they're not just promised that. That $160 million is sitting in some bank account in Toronto. So, bottom line is the Ontario Liberal government started Highway 69, and the Ontario Liberal government is going to have to finish Highway 69. And I can guarantee you, if I'm lucky enough to be your MPP on June 2nd, we will make this one of our highest priorities to get this done.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Next question is for Jamie West. The rural northern immigration pilot has proved to be a useful tool to increase Sudbury's workforce. The temporary program is scheduled to end later this year. Will your party work towards making this program permanent?
Yeah, Neil, the short answer is yes. Dolly Begum has been working on this for a long time. But, recognizing the abilities of people who are immigrating from other countries, I think it's great to have a temporary program because that's when you work out the bugs, where you see the flaws in it, right? And you get good feedback. And one of the things that the Conservatives have done very poorly over the last 4 years is not really consult with anybody. They have decided that their ideas are the best ideas. The slogan actually at Queen's Park is hear the other side. But when you're not working in partnership with any organization, when you are just deciding you know best, you make many, many errors. And we've seen this time and time again because they'll have to table an omnibus bill to patch the previous omnibus bill that had a bunch of errors. So the short answer basically is yes, we're going to make this permanent. We know it's important to the future. I think my colleagues know, we've all talked about this as well. This is the path forward. This is how we drive the economy. This is how we attract workers and how we grow our province.
Thank you, Mr. West. The next question is for Dr. Robinson. There has been a lot of talk about mining tonight, but you seem to be the only one talking about quality of life issues as part of economic development strategy for our community. Can you expand on why quality of life is important?
That's a terrific question. I mean, that is the question that's being missed by much of the conversation around Sudbury and even at this table. And I'll put it in a simple way. We are no longer in a resource economy. Resources still matter, but we are in a talent economy. Our success in attracting and holding talent is the one thing that determines. That is why this disaster at Laurentian is a real setback. And that's why we ought to be up there all the time demanding change. I don't know why we're letting it go so slowly. It's a disaster that this Conservative government has actually damaged our capacity to attract international students and talent here for those things that are so important to our future. It is a disaster.
I don't know why we're not hearing more questions about that tonight.
I don't know either. In any case, your question is sort of deceptively simple. It's hard because much of what we have to do is our responsibility here in the community. There is no reason for the provincial government to favor Sudbury over a Southern company. You've got to face it. We have to do it or we lose. Quality of life is the big draw globally, and it's going to get more important. And that means that we have to be designing and redesigning our city to be more efficient, more beautiful, more livable, more walkable. Those are things that are key parts of the green platform for everywhere. But we have to do it here if we're going to continue.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Next question is for Mr. Farrell. Raising minimum wage would not be an issue if cost of goods were unreachable for low-income families. What will you do to keep fuel, food, and merchandise affordable for Sudbury families?
Okay, so can you read that one more
Sure.
time?
Raising minimum wage would not be an issue if the costs of goods were unreachable were not or
It doesn't-
we're not unreachable for low-income families. I'm adding some words there to make it readable. What will you do to keep food, fuel, and merchandise affordable for Sudbury families?
Right. Okay. So there's certainly a lot in that question. First of all, I think it's extremely important that we provide we talk a lot about minimum wage, but a livable wage for people in our community. We know that we've gone through a huge amount of inflation, probably directly driven from the pandemic and supply chain issues, which David would probably be able to expand on a little bit more than I can. But in reality, fuel costs, food costs, and merchandising costs are going to continue to grow. We can either handle that in two ways. We either provide more money into people's pockets, or we actually find ways that people don't have to spend as much money out of their pocket. For example, the Ontario Liberal government will do things like, $1 a transit ride in the province of Ontario for the next 2 years. That's not only good for keeping money in people's pockets, it's good for our environment. It helps with affordability. The fact that we're announcing that we're taking the HST off anything that's $20 or below. You can go to your local lunch counter at lunch and get a sandwich or soup or whatever and not have to pay HST on it. These are real specific changes that we can do to help put money into people's pocket. Last fall, Stephen Del Duca was in town, and together we announced the winter tire tax credit. So every tire that you have on your car, for 4 tires, $75 for a snow tire, you get that tax credit. If you put studded tires on your car, you're able to get $100 of tax credit. Those are real things that put money into people's pockets. So although it's difficult to control fuel costs, I think a government can look at how it's regulated better, but in reality, competition would drive down the cost of fuel. And perhaps we may have to look at a standardized gas price throughout the entire province. So I hope that answers the question, because that was a bit of a loaded one.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. The next question is for Mr. West. What would your party have done differently than the Conservative Party of Ontario to manage the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Neil.
2 minutes.
I wanted that one.
So first, and I mentioned this earlier, and I mean it sincerely, it's not just because it's a chamber debate. The Chamber of Commerce really picked up the slack for small businesses in Ontario. When they were looking for resources, when they were trying to find what was available, when they were networking, the digital divide, all of these things. You stepped in a role that government should have played. It'd be great to work in partnership, but it shouldn't have fallen on your shoulders. And I want to congratulate you for the work you did, because it was amazing in a time where people were very stressed out and difficult. We're in a pandemic, right? And we need to recognize that. We need to recognize the precarity of people, the fear that was there. We're a little more accustomed to it. We all have our masks on the corner of our desks here. But in the beginning of the pandemic, when we were learning how quickly it was spread and we were learning about having to isolate, the first thing we would have done is brought in paid sick days. And we know that the paid sick days model works because New York has been doing this for more than a decade. And all of the fears about paid sick days being abused, they don't really wash out in the data that comes out of that. And so if you can't afford to buy milk and buy food and pay your rent, then you can't afford to stay home. And you create a situation where you go to work because maybe I don't have COVID, maybe it's just a runny nose. And then you don't take care of the business or any of your employees. And so we'd bring in those paid sick days. We'd also work in partnership, like I said, with the Chambers of Commerce, but also with different organizations to find the best way to be successful. This idea that the government put out in the early days of the pandemic of here's what you need to do to open and just keep scrolling till you find your industry, instead of working in partnership and telling restaurants, this is how we think you could work safely. And how do we connect with restaurant owners to find out how to work safely? How do we connect with hairstylists? How can we help you be successful? And so I think that partnership is really important. And then the final part of it, I think as well, is that dependability. We know, and it seems to be forgotten, we know the sacrifices that businesses made when they shut down. And we know it was unbelievable to me when I was in Toronto, that Toronto had a high number of COVID cases and they shut down all the small businesses, but all the large businesses were allowed to open and they were allowed to sell all the non-essential items. And that isn't fair. What you need is predictability for people. And when it can't be predictable because of pandemic, because of things that are not in your control as a business owner, then you need stable funding from the government that's going to arrive on time. Not something you apply for and hope for, and maybe you get and maybe you don't, but something that's going to help you immediately to make ends meet. Because As I said before, small businesses are the largest employers of our province. And if we don't support them, that collapses our economic engine and we cannot recover from that.
This is a really important question. I just would like to pick up on this because Jamie makes a really important points here. But in reality, I remember people saying to me at the beginning of the pandemic, Doug Ford was doing a really good job. But in actuality, as the pandemic continued to move on, he did not do a very good job. Quite frankly, he didn't listen to the science. And Ontario Liberal government will listen to scientists and they will make our decisions based on that. But what was appalling to me was the fact that we went 6, 12, 18 months when we could use that time to plan for, a strategic plan to how we actually manage the COVID. It was the COVID pandemic. We wasted that time. So I go back to the school system, which I know so well. There was not one, ventilating system put into a school in Sudbury over that 18 months. We had issues with rapid testing. And, quite frankly, most of the rapid tests went to MPPs that were conservative so they could give to their friends during, their Christmas gifts. So this type of government has to stop. And an Ontario Liberal government will put Sudburyans and Ontarians first.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
Thanks for letting me speak.
No worries. Dr. Robinson, did you want to add to that as Mr. Farrell had an opportunity?
I think they both gave some good information about it. I'm trying to look forward, not back.
Fair enough. All right, thank you. So that's good.
The next question, fine.
It's for you, yeah. Would your party reinstate the basic income pilot program to assess the costs and benefits of this program in Ontario?
Let me give you a short and shocking answer. No. We're already committed to implementing a basic income, a basic livable income. So, yeah, we'd use some of the work that's been done. We'd take some of the stuff that's already in that program, but would be part of our implementation plan. It wouldn't be just another research project.
Good, thank you. Mr. Farrell, the pandemic has highlighted the digital divide, particularly in northern and rural communities across the province. What are your party's plans to bridge this gap?
Yeah, it's extremely simple. High-speed internet it's an essential thing for life in Northern Ontario. And we have committed as a party to make sure that high-speed internet access for every Northern Ontario community will be part of our plan moving forward. It's a very simple answer to that.
Okay. The next question is for Jamie West. With the ever rising price of gas and the long-term environmental and sustainability issues associated with fossil fuel-based transportation, what would your party's government do to facilitate the transition from non-carbon based transportation in a manner that does not leave out those in rural areas not yet served by public transit and electric charging infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, the solution really is in the question as well, Neil. So the first thing we would do, and this doesn't move immediately to electric, but we would bring back the Northlander. The Northlander train service was canceled. We know how important it is, not just for travel to the south. The Liberals canceled Northlander. The Conservatives promised they'd bring it back. They promised $40 million in trains on rails. And then just on the eve of the election, they announced $5 million to study the problem. If they'd like to provide that $5 million, back into the economy, I can tell them the solution is to put the trains back on the rails. And so that would be the first thing we would do. We've missed an opportunity that started 3.5 years ago, because the reality is that car manufacturing plants are looking for the next Detroit. And I've heard this from car manufacturers from around the world who are very clearly global competitors, and they can set up shop anywhere. We can ship minerals from Sudbury anywhere. We can set up shop anywhere. We know from talking with them that you need more than putting an open for business sign outside the door. You need to have incentives to come here. But we are very desirable in Ontario because we have a lot of very strong, active, well-trained post-secondary students. And Dr. Robinson's right, we need to save Laurentian University, which is part of our platform. We have the tradespeople are able to do it. Most importantly, in Canada and Ontario, what we have, along with the auto sector in the south, is that we have socialized medicine that makes us very attractive to these people. And so we should be ramping up production of it. Instead of tearing down charging stations like Doug Ford was doing in the early days of the election and pretending now he cares about electric cars, we should be installing more of them. The transition really, quite frankly, for anyone who has a hybrid or electric car is that when your friends find out about it, you want one. So my son has one. My car will absolutely be probably hybrid because we don't have enough charging stations, but eventually electric as the technology gets better, we get more charging stations in place. And so we are committed as New Democrats to providing more electric vehicles. There's a backlog right now. We need to build more of them. We want to make sure that we're building as many as possible in Canada, so we drive the economy that way as well. And we want to make sure that we have charging stations that are accessible, not just in Southern Ontario, but across the north.
Thank you, Mr. West. The next question is for Mr. Farrell. We know that we can't have a strong business community without a resilient healthcare system. How would you bolster healthcare in Ontario, and what would you do? What would be your approach to managing COVID to ensure that we can sustain our opening and continue to build consumer confidence?
So healthcare is, after knocking on the thousands of doors that I've knocked on, healthcare is an issue that I hear at the doors on almost a day-to-day basis. And quite frankly, I'd like to really hyper localize my answer because I'd like to talk about HSN a little bit. And, first and foremost, we need to look at the funding model of HSN because we are really a tertiary healthcare site, and we want to make sure that we are actually getting the funding that we should be getting to make sure that we're taking in the patients for all Northeastern Ontario. First, and I think what's really important in this too is that we need to find a way to take the pressure off HSN's main building. And I know we're a one-site hospital, but quite frankly, I think there's about 14 or 15 off-sites for it. So how do we do that? Well, we need to look for partnerships. First of all, there are partnerships with St. Joe's. There's partnerships. I know that we send some of our alternative level care people to the Clarion Hotel. I mean, as the board of director of the hospice, chaired the hospice, we had 20 palliative care beds, and we talked and we had exploration talks with HSN about taking some of the pressure from palliative care off HSN. Also, I think too, taking the pressure off that building will happen if we look at our homeless situation, look at the situation of the most vulnerable people in our community. They're taking a lot of time in an emergency room. We need to work really, really strongly. And quite frankly, I'm appalled with the way our homeless situation has evolved in Sudbury over the last 4 years. I was away for a couple of years. I came back. I didn't recognize our downtown. We put our office specifically downtown to highlight the importance of the central business district of Sudbury. We need a strong strategy. We need a homeless shelter for the most vulnerable in our population. And quite frankly, if we do that, we will take some of the pressure off our healthcare. Look, building a new hospital may be something that we should do, but that's not going to be a low-hanging fruit solution. That's a 10-year deal. We need to look for solutions to healthcare right now. The wait times are too long. The surgeries, the fact that the nurses are being burnt out. Anybody who's working in healthcare just needs to get a break from the pandemic. So that's what we would do immediately to try to help alleviate some of the pressures with healthcare in Sudbury.
Thank you.
I know we're all going in, but I think it's fair to bring up that the reason that we're having issues at Health Sciences North is because they weren't adequately funded when the Liberals were in government over 15 years. And so saying that we're going to fix the problems that we had in the past doesn't feel genuine to me. That every year the CEO would stand there with a check that didn't keep up with the cost of inflation. And then Sudbury now, when you talk to healthcare providers around Ontario, they measure hallway medicine in Sudbury's. We are the gold standard for hallway medicine. And this was not something that Doug Ford didn't address it, but this was brought in under 15 years of Liberal government. And so I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just saying we need to acknowledge where it came from.
But Jamie,
and moving forward.
I just want to take exception to that for a second because I know you want to point to the Liberal government too, but remember who started the hospital? It was Mike Harris who started the hospital. And we know that the actual size of HSN was too small from the start.
But you need to fund the hospital to have adequate services. And then the other thing, and I think I heard from you as well, is it's just scrapping Bill 124. It's a terrible bill.
Absolutely.
If I may just add something to that, I see the next question is a really short, easy answer. Healthcare is the biggest expense of the provincial government.
It is.
It's been changing rapidly and getting more expensive rapidly. We now need to have more long-term care. We have the problem that we are the regional center for drugs and homelessness. We have an older population than the rest of the province, and on average, a thicker population, and that was never taken into account in the funding formula. So we've got a lot to do. The suggestions David made are correct. There's also, we're going to see a distributed structure for HSN eventually, in which we're using electronics to put together all the pieces. I think we all agree about that. It is a funding problem at the provincial level. I think everybody here agrees really seriously that Sudbury is a harder problem than many places in the province. Now, the question.
One second, I would just like to, so just on behalf of the chamber, I'd like to hear you all agree also that HSN was built too small.
Oh, it's absolutely built too
It
small.
was stopped.
Like David said, there's 14 sites for a one-site
Yeah,
hospital.
it's a terrible.
Terrible model. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, the next is for.
My question was really,
So your question is, what are your policies? What are your policies about ODSP, particularly in raising it?
For disabled persons, we want to double ODSP immediately.
Okay, thank you.
I could be brief.
It was very brief.
I'll just chime in on that also. The Ontario Liberal government will increase ODSP by 20% and will increase the ceiling for the clawback to $6,000 a year. So this is we've heard this in our platform development process time and time again. We need to do something significant for people who are on ODSP in our province, period.
Okay. And the next one's for Jamie. How will you fight to keep taxes and rising debt down?
So,
Jamie?
yeah, no, this is, I'm proud to answer this question. Our party doesn't always see taxes as a bad thing. What we do see as a bad thing is who is being taxed the hardest. And what's been happening for the last 20 years is that it is the working class, it is the people struggling to make ends meet who continue to have their taxes rise again and again. We've been sold a bill of goods since I was 10 years old that trickle-down economics was going to work. And if the most wealthy don't pay any taxes or very minimal taxes, it trickles down into the economy. And we don't see that. What we see actually are more and more billionaires who have money to fly out into space. And so what we're saying is that in order to have the things that we depend on, we just talked about the hospital. In order to fund that hospital, we need tax money to do it. That's the reality. And politicians feel afraid to say taxes because it's become a scary word. But we need to get that money, not from working people, not from the poor, but from the people who have not been paying their fair share in the past. And I'm not talking about, sometimes when you say the wealthy, people think, oh, it's $200,000 or $500,000. We're talking about people who, quite frankly, own multiple homes, who travel around the world on a regular basis and have homes in different countries. We have to ensure they're paying their fair share because everybody else is. And that's really where we get the tax base from.
Thank you.
Can I just chime in for a minute? Because, it's when we talk about the political partisanship in the province, the old adage is that the New Democrats will tax and spend. The Conservatives will cut and slash and take services away. I think it's important for the Liberal government to be really aware that we need to rebuild our middle class in this province and in this country. And if you build a vibrant middle class with, through immigration into this country, you will develop over time a tax base that is strong enough to support the programs that we need. In my mind, it's the only way that we can do it. We must increase our population through immigration, and we must reestablish the middle class in this country. There's far too many people that are rich, and there are far too many people that are poor. Where are the people that just need to make ends meet and move forward?
Thank you. All right, the next
Another question
is for Mr. Farrow. What do you see the two most important issues facing our community, and how does your party's platform present the best solutions to these issues?
Two most important issues that I'm hearing at the door on a day-to-day basis are affordability and healthcare. But I'd like to move that a little bit to a couple of specific things. Number one, long-term care in this province needs an entire rethink. We need to think on how we actually treat our elderly. When I look at my father-in-law being in an institution, and that's what it was in long-term care, the last years of his life were not with dignity. We must do that for our seniors in this province. So we need to rethink. We need to spend more money on people, getting people in the homes, keeping their homes in their homes longer. And so the rethink has to happen on that. The second thing for our community is the entire homelessness and opioid crisis. We must address, I think we can agree as political leaders here that we are embarrassed about what's happening in our community right now. We need a long-term strategy to fix this. If I'm lucky enough, once again, to be the MPP on June 2nd, in the first 100 days, I'm going to call and get together a group of people that actually understand what's going on in downtown. We're not going to hire a consultant from Toronto to come here and tell us what to do. There are people in our community right now that know what the solutions need to be. We need to work hand in hand with these people and find those low-hanging fruit again to help the solutions that we need in their community. We need shelter. We need an immediate transition housing. We need mental health assistance for these folks on site. I went for a drive a couple of weeks ago. No, Jamie did the same thing with the Go Give folks. And these people are absolutely incredible people. But I was absolutely moved for what I saw. I saw these people doing wellness checks. I saw kids on the street that I taught. It just broke my heart to see what was going on in this community. And as far as a warming center goes, well, that's a nice name for a place for people to go crash. So we need to get our act together as a community and fix this problem for the most vulnerable people in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Jamie West. Supply chain issues have hampered business competitiveness throughout the pandemic. What actions would you take to ensure their resiliency?
Well, I think part of the issues during the pandemic is that everyone was trying to access the same things. There was a few curveballs that we were hit, where it felt like lumber was more expensive than gold, for example, because everyone was at home and decided it was a great time to renovate and to build. And so some of that stuff is going to smooth out naturally. But one of the things I've been talking about, throughout this whole thing as a New Democrat is the importance of working with others. My background is in health and safety. It's what I did for 17 years. And that's all risk management. But what you learn out of that is that even when you have amazing ideas and great ideas, the best ideas in the world, when you don't talk to the people who are involved, you make major mistakes. And sometimes you upset people because you make major mistakes. And so for issues such as this and many issues, what you need to do is work with the people involved to find out where the gaps are and where the stumbling parts are. An easy question sometimes is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? And sometimes the solutions are so simple. David was talking about centers. Sorry, I was saying sections. Yeah. Warming centers. So when I went out to the Samaritan Center and I talked to people who are there and they tell me, well, I have a meal and then I wait outside for an hour and then I get somewhere else. And then I'm allowed to be there to a certain time. And then I wait outside for an hour and then I have a lunch. And then I wait outside for an hour. Well, in the wintertime, when you are constantly warming up and cooling off, it's a broken system, right? And so we need to pull that together. And it's just an example I'm using about working with it. So when you're looking at supply sector, when you're looking at delivery and just in time, the best solutions are the people who work in that field. They're going to present the answers. And then it's our role as government to smooth that pathway forward and make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. West. The next question is for Dr. Robinson. Natural gas appliances burn methane gas, a gas with 86 times the warming potential of CO2. Gas stoves also emit nitrogen dioxide, polluting indoor air quality and exacerbating asthma attacks in children. When will you change the building code and stop allowing the installation of gas appliances?
Really nice question. The day I'm put in charge of the government or a ministry that can control it, it will happen. The fact is that changing the building code involves negotiating with both federal government and a fairly complex set of legislative changes. It could be done fast. It would cause some screaming. It has to be done fast. Natural gas is about a third of our emissions in this province. They have to be stopped in the next 5 years. That means we have to do this immediately.
Thank you. Yeah, I see that question. Actually, I have a question from myself, actually. So I'm gonna put it to
That's mine. I want that one.
You will get that one, but I'll put it to Mr. Farrow first. Throughout the news in Ontario, we see downtown cores, businesses suffering broken windows, impacts of, the plights that downtowns are currently suffering. Homeowners are getting their property taken sometimes from walking inside their house while they're there, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of action to try and protect homeowners and business owners from what's considered petty theft or mischief, however, can be burdensome to homeowners as well as business owners. What would your government do to help alleviate that problem and take the burden off of homeowners and business owners while continuing to support our vulnerable populations?
Yes, so a fantastic question. I go back to what I see on the street on a day-to-day basis, and it's absolutely appalling that we've allowed it to get to this way, get to where we're at today. Some people think it's a policing matter, and the police do what they can, but I think they're overwhelmed. It's a matter of what the municipal government can do. They do what they can. I just think that this has to be a community-based solution. We have to wrap around the police, the municipality, the provincial government, the federal government, the Chamber of Commerce, all the people that are doing business in our community, and we have to have one cohesive strategy. There are far too many people trying to do piecemeal things, trying to do the right things, but we have to have a community strategy. And we can't spend all our time talking about it. My experience in the education field is we spent 90% of the time speaking about issues and 10% of the time doing. We need to reverse that strategy. The solutions are here in this community, but we have to bring it together. It's appalling when you think of this. The Go Give project needs about $168,000 a year to do the services that they do. They can't get anybody in the government, municipally, provincially, or federally, to fund them. They get their donations from the people in this community that can at least afford to get them. We have lots of money as a community. We need to find partnerships to make sure that we get those issues solved. So yes, people want short answers and they want short-term solutions. We need a community-based strategy to make this happen.
Who'd like to go next? I thought we were all going through, or can I just?
Are we all answering that one?
If you like, sure.
So this is a really important issue. And a lot of it comes down to homelessness, as well as addictions and mental health. And so opioids is affecting across North America. In fact, we had a meeting, a roundtable meeting with politicians from the States who came to us and asked us how we were solving it. And we didn't have the solutions. I mean, we know from working with Raise Access and all the other groups here to Go Give, we know what has to happen and what has to be in place, but they were hoping for a magic bullet solution. I want to congratulate the city for having the crosses for change. So Miles Keeney, actually, he died across from the fire department, and Denise Sandul, his mother, had a cross erected. And it was traumatizing for those EMS workers because they respond to these overdose calls. And sometimes these overdose calls are not successful. And so when you see the cross, it's a reminder of the trauma that they went through. And they asked to move it somewhere else. And Denise thought that it was going to be moved in a back corner somewhere. And it's on one of the busiest intersections in Sudbury, as we all know. There are currently 238 crosses out there. And each one of those crosses doesn't represent someone who overdosed because they're put up by request because some families don't want the cross, right? Or they're not aware because of separation. So we know there's an opioid overdose crisis. And we know that Sudbury has more per capita and has more than anywhere else in Northern Ontario. The problem, though, is that we need a supervised consumption site that's funded by the government. And we finally have one in place, but we don't have funding from the government. And we would have had it in place 2 or 3 years ago, but Doug Ford decided he would limit the number of supervised consumption sites and that it was okay in Northern Ontario. We didn't need one in Sudbury because Thunder Bay had one. And that people who needed that service could just drive the 14 hours one way to Thunder Bay to have the service because he doesn't understand the North. And so we need to provide the funding. I agree there's community partnerships as well, but as a province, we have a responsibility to fund it and invest. And if you don't do it because you care about people, and I'm a lefty, I lead with my heart. There's an economic reason to do this. The amount of money we were spending on EMS, the way we're clogging up our emergency systems, the amount of trauma that we're having from family members and friends. And like Neil said, the businesses that are being affected by this, by people who don't feel safe to go downtown, by people who don't feel safe to live near downtown. All of this is stuff that we need to invest in. And we know the solutions are there. There are experts out there. There's a group working in Sudbury, working on this. I've been working in partnerships. So I tabled my bill to declare a healthcare emergency. So we would stop saying it's tragic and I feel so sad. And we would say, this is an emergency and that would require the province to provide funding in the north for the opioid crisis.
90% of the time talking. The biggest single part of the solution is housing for people who don't have homes, period. And we could build those. We could put in tiny houses in a dozen places in the downtown and cut the deaths very rapidly. The issue here is who should pay for it. This is a provincial problem. We are importing problems as well as producing our own.
We are.
And so that's why we're not acting. It's because the province is not paying for what is a provincial responsibility. And we as a community haven't fully taken it up. We're going in circles.
And David, if I can just add, we can do that by eliminating the current provincial government on June 2nd. I agree, it's so nice being here because I agree with so many of the things that these two guys are saying. But the only thing I'll take exception with Jamie is I think as politicians, we need to get out of the way, provide the funding and let the solutions happen where the people that know the best, right? So that my process is I'm going to be there to help you where I can, get out of the way and let the experts make it happen.
I think that's what I said.
And thank you all for your response.
I was emphasizing that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what I did.
Perfect.
Several other issues. Okay, my question?
Dr. Robinson talks about the importance of attracting people to Sudbury, but he did not support the KED. There appears to be a disconnect here.
Does anyone believe the KED is going to attract skilled labor and professionals to the city? If they do, the KED would make some sense. Otherwise, it's a total waste of money. And that 100 million should probably be used to buy some of Laurentian's lands back from the banks.
Thank you for your answer.
Notice I can be very short, very.
And the next one again is for Dr. Robinson. You mentioned that you were involved in the arts community. Seems like arts and the economy aren't a natural fit for a former professor of economics. What role does arts have in the economic development in Sudbury?
There's a number of really important things. One of the obvious ones is if you're trying to attract highly skilled people, intelligent people who've done a lot of training and now have young families, what they want is high-level entertainment and arts. That's part of quality of life for people who are well-educated. Those are the professionals and the highly skilled people we need. They want that for their children. This is a big deal. If you can't promise an engineer from Sri Lanka that their kids are going to get a good education here and maybe have a music program, we've been cutting out these darn music programs like mad. That's what they want. They want a civilized, cultured education for their kids. So when you think about it, the arts are one of our main ways to attract people. They're also one of the ways to develop our own kids. One of my daughters did a theater program. She now makes movies. Not making a lot of money, unfortunately. She's an expensive child. But the fact is, that was what we wanted for our kids. And if she couldn't get that here, we would have sent her somewhere else. She went through Laurentian because we had a theater program. That kept money in this community. Now I can start to talk about the thousands of pages of research on the economic role of the arts, but I've given you a couple really simple examples. It's crucial to building the kind of knowledge economy that we need here.
If I can make a short comment, Neil, and just and very short. There's an intern program at Queen's Park, and so you have to compete to have an intern. And one of the things I found really interesting when Railing Guppy came to Sudbury that she said is that Sudbury has way more arts than I ever expected. And so we have a reputation, Sudbury is sort of a working class and rough and tumble and, and hunters and that sort of thing. And she was just overwhelmed with the amount of arts, like music and photography and fine arts and all those things that I'm not good at, but love to enjoy. And so I think that one of the things that would be important as well is to promote the arts that we have here. And there's things like We Live Up Here and stuff that are doing a great job with that. But I think that, letting people know how much art we have in Sudbury, because there was that stereotype, right? She didn't expect it. She expected some, but she expected, some guy off in the corner with a guitar, not actual bands playing or the vibrant art community that we have.
The city has been wonderfully ambitious, and this goes way back to the 50s. And it kind of reached a peak, in my view, its development, its momentum in the arts, 8 years ago, maybe. And it's in decline. Its arts are in decline. The schools are losing programs. We just lost all of the performing and creative arts at Laurentian. They've shut down programs at Cambrian.
Yeah.
And there are reasons. If the schools don't have the programs, then Cambrian and Laurentian won't have those programs. If you don't hire a new art teacher at LaSalle or a new music teacher at LaSalle, you lose the program at Laurentian. So and that means you lose money because kids then leave the city. We don't, instead of attracting people, and Jamie's right, people have been astonished at what we have here, but we're not making progress. We're going backwards right now.
So if I could just jump into it, it all comes down again to provincial funding. So my experience is, of course, in the education sector, and I struggled as an elementary school principal year after year to make sure that instrumental music happened. I was not staffed for it, and by hook or by crook, I would find a way to keep it going. My old adage has always been, if you teach a child to create, they won't destroy. So we need to continue to have a vibrant art community, music program, and all that, because that's what is part of the fabric of the culture of a community.
Thank you.
And do remember that what's happened with school boards is they've become building managers. Their incentive is to reduce the cost of the programs. So we don't have advocates for education in our school boards or in our school districts now.
Or for music education. Or
For music or anything else. We are a colonial operation. I say that in that the budget set out so where the money goes out, our tax money goes out, comes back in. How much do we get? They decide down there. We do not sit and vote on what we're willing to pay for. And if we can't vote on what we're willing to pay for, well, a government like ours is just going to strip some of the most valuable things out of this community.
because it's not important to them.
So that leads us into our next question, which all of you will have the opportunity to answer. I'm going to start with Dr. Robinson. If the Ford government is reelected, what will you do to make Sudbury's needs heard and acted on?
Let's assume that that means if I'm down in Queen's Park as the MPP, because otherwise I'll be working here doing what I've been doing all along. I'll be building alliances with a lot of the other communities that need some of the specific things we need so that we can be put pressure on. You did actually fairly good, let me not be condescending, good description of how you build community organizations and community support and community plans. There was a huge process of community planning around, well, after the strikes and layoffs of the 70s, running into the 80s, and that carried us through until the early 2000s. Really amazing, the stuff that came out of that. We haven't repeated that process. The leaders of that era are gone, and we do not have, at this point, replacement leaders. As your MPP or as a citizen, I'm going to be among those fighting for those things. If I were your MPP, I'd be more effective because people would listen to me. I've shown before I can get people to work together on big projects. Look at that architecture school. The university said you can't have it. The province said you can't have it. The chamber said we want it. Remember, Debbie? One of the first people I talked to was Debbie. That's how you reinvigorate a community. Well, we can do that again.
Yeah, Mr. Farrow, same question.
Great. So of course, when one takes on a challenge like this, one has to believe in the power of their own voice. If you didn't believe that you could make a difference, you wouldn't do this job. And I commend both my colleagues tonight because they believe they want to do a good job. So if I'm lucky enough to be your member of parliament, or provincial parliament on June 2nd, I will continue to work at trying to build a different political model where we are working together with, I've never got anything done in my life without working together with people. I've actually seen Jamie in the Queen's Park answer a very specific question to a minister and then walk across the floor and shake his hand and have a conversation with that. People in this community, people across Ontario want their politicians to do it differently. We must work collaboratively together. We must work extremely hard to make the changes. We have to believe that our voices could be heard. And if I'm elected on June 3rd, I can guarantee you that you will hear my voice for this community loud and strong. However, saying that, I'm like David, I will work with partnerships. I can see David Robinson and I having many conversations about what we need to do for the environmental situation in the Laurentian University and our community. I can see myself going back to Jamie saying, Jamie, look, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me out? This is what we need to do to make our community better and make our politicians better because people don't generally trust us. We need to be authentic on what we do and work hard for the people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. West.
Thanks, Neil. I love this question. It's a really great question. Something about a month, 2 months after I was elected, I was thinking about is every time someone retires or loses an election, they always in their speech talk about it was an honor and privilege to represent the people of my riding. Doesn't matter what riding it is. And I always thought that was just a beautiful phrase, but until you're in the role, you actually see what an honor and privilege it is, how important it is to people to have that quality time to be able to share their story. And I have said consecutively over the last 4 years, it is my role to echo and amplify the voices of my constituents. I bring them forward. And so when I talked about raising PSWs and having a PSW floor wage, when I talked about eliminating Bill 124, when I called for a healthcare emergency for opioids, when Laurentian University went insolvent, I'm going to be honest, I don't mean to be offensive to my colleagues. The NDP was all over this issue from day one. It's a little more than a year. And we worked tirelessly on it at both levels. It was Charlie Angus at the federal level who called the emergency debate on it. And there were MPs from across the country who spoke about Laurentian University with incredible passion. But I'll tell you, our local MPs, and I'm good friends with them, I respect their work, but they spoke with the passion of reading a Wikipedia page. That Laurentian is a school in my community. You need someone who's going to speak and elevate those voices. And we've all been clear about this, right? Our role isn't to make the decisions. Our role is to listen to people who are experts in the field, to consult with them, to get good ideas, and to approach the government about why this is a good idea and how to move forward. I stand on my record over the last 4 years on every single issue that has been important in our community. I have been front and center, and I've been vocal. And because I know how valuable this role is, how important it is, how honored I am to be in this role, I am the first one in, I am the last one to leave. The only other person who leaves later than me is France. From time to time when I cross her door, it's closed and I feel like I've won a victory. But there's a sense of pride when you walk through Queen's Park and you were the only footsteps aside from the security guards walking through that building. And so I think I've done a good job over the 4 years. I'm looking for people to trust me again with their votes so I can continue to do that job, continue to amplify your voice, continue to speak on your behalf, and to be the voice of Sudbury and Coppercliff.
So I just have to stand up a little bit for my colleagues who are MPP, the Liberal MPPs. As a matter of fact, we did do a lot of things. And one of the most important thing is we're pushing a bill forward right now that we will never see any university in this country again have to be put through the CCAA process. And quite frankly, through our federal government, we have provided, I think it's $1.9 million to the French language program in the University of Sudbury. So we have not just sat by idly, we're doing the job also.
But the Liberal government federally is in power. You don't need a private member's bill to eliminate the CCA process. You can do that at any time. Saying we're going to push it forward, I don't understand that. If I had that ability, I would make that clear from day one. It shouldn't have been used at Laurentian. We can all agree on that. It's devastated Laurentian.
Yes.
All the reasons we were told about Laurentian turned out not to hold any water, that those programs are viable. All these people's lives were devastated so they could rob the piggy bank, as David has said. You know, at a federal level, we should already have this in place, saying this is not appropriate for public institutions and not something we're going to bring forward in the future.
I think, Jamie, we all can agree that university education We can't lose it here in our community. We must protect it every chance we can. We are, one of the things that really concerns me is that we don't often talk about, I don't hear people talking about how important it is to the students. I think the students have been left out in this process. So a Liberal government and it will actually keep students first in this. One of the things that really concerns me about Laurentian University is this. Oh, are you going to shut me down? All right, you're going to shut me down. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll have plenty of time in
Okay.
closing remarks
Okay.
to continue.
I will stop now then.
But yeah, so we'll get on to closing remarks. And so thank you again, especially to the audience for all those questions, and thanks to the candidates for your frank answers. But now we'll hear closing remarks from each of the candidates in reverse alphabetical order. So you have a final 2 minutes for these remarks. So Mr. West, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you as well to the Chamber for organizing all this. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. I want to acknowledge my colleagues for participating. This is hard. It's a difficult thing to do, and I acknowledge all the work and how difficult it is. This election, my friends, it's frankly about choosing someone who's going to stand by you, someone who's going to help make life more affordable, someone who's going to provide the critical public services that you depend on. Our province right now is at a crossroads. Everyday life, from filling up your gas tank to buying a home to raising a family, has become harder. It's become more expensive. Day-to-day costs that students and seniors and families and small businesses face are quite frankly out of control. Gas, hydro, childcare, grocery bills, they're all through the roof. The Liberals had 15 years to make life better and they failed. Ford promised to fix that Liberal mess, make life more affordable, but he's failed and things become more expensive. Conservatives cut. It's what they do. They cut and they cut and they cut some more. Ford cut billions of dollars from healthcare, from long-term care, from education, environment. And what we get with consecutive conservative Liberal governments are deep cuts and broken promises. And when the hardworking people in Sudbury and Coppercliff see life getting harder, they find it impossible to get ahead. And it's no wonder that people feel frustrated. They're fed up with being told they have to choose between bad and worse. They're fed up being told that hope is too much to ask for. And I'm running for re-election because I know that you deserve better. And I know that if we come together, we're going to fix what's broken. We can improve healthcare by repealing Bill 124. We can track PSWs by providing decent wages and workloads they can handle. We can have a home care system that's fully funded so people can age at home like they want to. We can save Laurentian University. We can have dental care and mental care for all. Families can have affordable childcare. People can afford homes. Kids can go to school with smaller classrooms and better ventilation. Hope starts with electing an NDP government. When you elect a New Democrat, you elect somebody who's strong, who is ready, and who is always working for you. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. West. Dr. Robinson, your closing statement, please.
Well, I want to be your MPP because I want to make Sudbury richer. And I hope that listening to me, you've seen real evidence that I understand what it will take, that I've done the thinking. Other people are beginning to follow me. I really appreciate David taking notes all the way through here. I haven't been talking about what I do about inflation or gas prices because they aren't on the table here. Jamie may think that yeah, people in their homes are feeling those, but they aren't what we're actually debating here. We're debating how your MPP is going to make Sudbury better off. And that means focusing on the key economic opportunities and fighting across a whole range of debates down at Queen's Park that affect us. But if you don't have a clear idea of how this economy works and what the future is, that it is a talent economy and we have to attract and develop talent, then you might as well just hide under the table because that's the big story. I could, if I want, sort of compete on the family stories. You know, I've got a son. I've got a son, I didn't mention this, did I, who played for the Argonauts and won a Grey Cup ring.
Wow.
I've got a daughter who's doing her PhD in engineering and working on housing policy with both the provincial and federal government representatives. I've got a daughter who's making films. I've got a wife who actually piloted getting a park at the end of our street that connects to Rainbow Roots. Those are important accomplishments. I've got a list of accomplishments I mentioned at the beginning, like starting an architecture school, like launching a mining supply sector. And I think you want experience. You want someone who has proven experience and understanding.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. Farrow, your closing remarks, please.
First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to the Chamber for hosting this event. It's been a great experience. I'd also like to say thank you to Jamie and David for being relatively nice to me for my first debate ever. I really appreciate that. I feel the same way as they do. It is a huge task to take this on. It's hard on our families. It's hard. We get, social media can be really damaging to us. So I really respect the work that you both have done here tonight. I guess I want to close by looking out there and talk to the people of Sudbury and say to them, I really appreciate you actually talking with us tonight and giving us these hard questions. For me, this election is about one thing. This is an election about the Doug Ford Conservatives. And I need you to ask this one question to yourself. Did Sudbury move forward or did Sudbury move backwards under the last 4 years of Doug Ford? And the answer to me is extremely clear. We moved backwards. We moved backwards in university education where the Ford government allowed this to happen to our community. Highway 69 was not advanced the way it needed to be. The Northern Ontario Heritage Fund had been cut by $72 million. I believe that I will be a strong voice for this community. I will bring the local issues to Queen's Park. I will be your voice at Queen's Park. Now, the New Democrats, in my mind, have been AWOL over the last 4 years. And that is absent without leadership. So they oppose, but they don't propose any solutions. And solutions come from working together with people and getting policies forward. Leadership is not screaming from the sidelines. Leadership is working with people across the aisle in Ontario to bring policies forward. So as your MPP, I've worked really hard. I will be a hard worker. I've knocked on over 5,000 doors. I will return your emails. I will return your phone calls. My office will be open 5 days a week. You might even receive a phone call from your MPP. I have political backbone and I'll be the voice at Queen's Park. And finally, I'd like to say on June 2nd, I respectfully asked you for your vote so together we can make Sudbury stronger for each and every one of our citizens. I'm running to be your strong voice. I'm running to be a strong voice for Sudbury. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well,
Thank you, Mr.
are
Farrow.
we getting the extra points for short and concise answers?
Well, I do have to thank you all very much for not only your debate, but your kind debate for the most part, and for keeping your answers on time. So I do appreciate that. It made my job a bit easier tonight. So in closing, I'd like to thank the candidates for your participation tonight and for your candid responses to the issues that have been raised this evening. Best of luck during the campaign period and with this election. I would like to also acknowledge our sponsor, Post Media, for their support. The Greater Sudbury of Commerce urges the voters of this community to exercise their option to vote on June 2nd. We hope tonight's exercise has helped you in becoming better informed about the issues and that you will keep them in mind when casting your ballot. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and good night.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.